Hi, my name is Dr. Catherine Hughes from Psych. I'm a criminal psychologist and I run a business that enables me to bring knowledge and learning to everyone, not just those who are studying at schools, colleges or universities. And I do this by producing a range of blogs, vlogs and free online courses. But I also run some slightly more in-depth courses, both online and face-to-face. You don't need any previous qualifications to learn with me, and there are several subjects available. So once you've finished watching this video, head on over to my website and see if you can make it to an event or learn online in your own time. This psychological analysis is looking at Chris Watts, who murdered his pregnant wife and his two daughters, aged 3 and 5, in 2018. I had already come across this case a while back, and I used the footage of the media interviews that he gave in my course on detecting deception. During these interviews, he's talking about the disappearance of his wife and his children, and he displays some of the classic signs of deception. This case has recently been thrown into the spotlight because of the Netflix documentary called The Murderer Next Door. After watching that and reading through pages and pages of interview transcripts and news clippings, I can certainly see why people fall so easily into a debate about this case. Some sources and media reports refer to him as a monster or evil, and others have pointed out that his wife was very controlling and that his parents wanted him to appeal on the grounds of her being emotionally abusive. There are dedicated Facebook groups and pages for and against each side. After considering all of the information on this case, it doesn't matter to me if she was the most vile woman on the face of this earth. She did not deserve to die. We can't condone mob justice or individuals taking the law into their own hands to get retribution. The law works in society and it's fair and just. For those of you who don't know about the case, I'll briefly describe the crime and then I'll move on to the psychology behind Chris Watts' actions. Chris Watts was married to Shanann and they had two daughters, Bella and Celeste. Shanann was pregnant with a son. They were having problems in their marriage, and so Shanann had taken the girls away for a few weeks to visit their grandparents. She came back. She went out again on a works training course for the weekend. She was dropped off at 2 a.m. and at 5 a.m. Chris Watts woke her and told her that they needed to talk about their marriage and that he didn't love her anymore. Shanann reacted badly, saying, "You'll never see the girls again." Watts straddled her and strangled her on the bed. Their daughter Bella walked in and asked what was wrong with Mummy. He told her that Mummy was just sick and that she'd be okay. He wrapped her body in a bedsheet and dragged her down the stairs, and he put her in the back of his pickup truck. He went back into the house and then both children were up. He put them on the back seat of the pickup truck with their dead mother beneath their feet. He drove out to an oil field he was working at and dragged his wife out of the car. The children asked what was wrong with her and he told them that she'd be okay. He went back to the car and put a blanket over the head of Celeste. He held her mouth and nose until she died. He carried her up some iron steps leading to the top of an oil tanker, opened the lid and threw her in. He then made his way back down to the car, and Bella asked if the same thing was going to happen to her as Cece. He put a blanket over her head and then held his hand over her mouth and nose until she died. She struggled and shouted, "No, Daddy." He took her body up to the oil tanker next to the one that he just put the other daughter in, and he threw her in. He then buried Shanann's body and went to work. When he returned home that day, the police were already there with his wife's concerned friend who was looking for her. He'd taken her wedding ring off and he'd put it on the nightstand. He'd threw a relationship book in the bin and he'd planted her phone and watch inside the house. He gave interviews to the media appealing for his wife's return, claiming that he had no idea where she'd gone. He'd sent her text messages throughout the day asking where she was, knowing full well that she was dead, all in a failed attempt to get away with it. He later confessed to killing Shanann because she'd strangled the children, but he did later change that and admitted killing to all three. Now that's a really short, condensed version of the crime itself. I've left out some of the more disturbing details as that's not what my videos are about. I'm interested in the psychology that drove his behaviour, not the specific details of the crime. Watch the Netflix documentary and then read the interview transcripts that he gave to the FBI and the CDI a few years later if you want in-depth details. As is usually the case with these sorts of crimes, some media outlets get details wrong and then that's then passed on as being true. Chris Watts appeared to be the good guy, the perfect husband, the perfect father. He's known for being a quiet and introverted person, never wanting to be in the spotlight. He put up with his wife's videos because that's what she wanted to do, and he went along with it. Shanann had always been the dominant person in their relationship, and Chris was fairly submissive. Shanann made all of the financial decisions, and he went along with whatever she says, quite happily as well, so it seems. They'd been married for 8 years, and his parents never wanted him to marry her. Chris Watts' sister said that she would put him down in public at times or say things to them about him, but that he was a fairly placid man. Shanann sold weight loss patches that Chris had used. He'd lost a lot of weight and he'd begun to work out. He ended up having an affair with a woman that he met at work. While his wife was away, Chris spent the best part of a month with the woman. He and his wife had not had a sexual relationship since conceiving their third child, but they did on the night that she returned home for that works training event, the night before he strangled her. This doesn't initially come across as anything particularly evil or manipulating on Chris Watts' behalf. It could be seen as him having one last attempt to see if there was any spark left in their relationship, which of course there wasn't. Early the next morning, he tells her that it's not working and that he wants a divorce. And that is the pivotal moment that things changed psychologically. His mask well and truly falls off. A lot of people giving commentary on the Chris Watts case are suggesting that he's a covert narcissist, and I would agree with that as well. In my last video, I talked about covert and overt narcissists. An overt narcissist is arrogant, pretentious, dominant, self-assured, an exhibitionist, or even aggressive, whereas a covert narcissist is overly sensitive, insecure, defensive, and anxious about an underlying sense of shame and inadequacy. Of course, both types of narcissists have a preoccupation with satisfying their own needs, and that's even at the expense of others. I don't know Chris Watts personally, and I only have access to public knowledge. However, he can be seen as a covert narcissist by playing the nice guy. He gets pleasure from thinking others see him as good. I don't think that he was this nice guy simply because he liked doing nice things for people. After all, nice guys don't kill their families. He did things to make himself look good. He'd met another woman and he was excited by her. They had a really good sexual relationship. Chris and his wife had drifted apart and he possibly began to resent her for never asking his point of view or opinion, whereas this other woman did. And at that point, no aspects of the case or anything really out of the ordinary. It's happened to many couples over the years. Some couples mend their relationship and others break apart. But they both had a different idea of what should happen next. Shanann obviously wanted to work on the relationship and Chris wanted to walk away. Shanann was obviously hurt by this and threatened to take away what she knew was the most important thing to him, his children. And at that moment in time, he snapped. Any rage or upset that he'd previously held in came rushing out all at once. In fact, in his own words, he said, "This was like the epitome of being angry, the epitome of showing rage, the epitome of losing your mind." He told investigators that he doesn't know what he was thinking at the time. He said it felt like something else was controlling him on that day. From a psychological point of view, he wasn't getting what he wanted. He wanted to be seen as this nice family guy who's friendly and helpful, who people liked. But he also wanted the sex and excitement from this other woman, which was new and exciting. At the point that he snapped, it was simply because he couldn't have it all. He said he felt like something else was controlling him that day, and the subtext to that could be that he was saying he wasn't himself. He is this nice guy. He spent many years carefully crafting people's perceptions of him, looking like he was doing all of the right things. However, he most likely did those things because he wanted to satisfy his own needs at the expense of other people. Some commentary, though, is suggesting that he's a psychopath, and I would question that, to be honest. One even used the term community psychopath, and that name refers to those psychopaths who don't commit crime and live amongst us. They still have the psychopathic traits, but they don't become killers. Not all serial killers are psychopaths, and not all psychopaths are serial killers. I do cover that in my online courses, looking at the psychology of serial killers and murderers. I mention how all of the psychopathic serial killers that we know of have been caught, so some of them are not really very good at getting away with it. Some psychopaths, though, live very successful lives, and there are most likely very many psychopaths in upper management positions and in politics. The most common understanding of a psychopath is someone who's skilled at lying and manipulating others, someone who has little empathy and feels no remorse. Although psychopaths can come across as really quite charming, they're at ease manipulating other people around them. Psychopaths have got no concern for the feelings of other people. They have a complete disregard for any sense of social obligation, and they have an inability to form lasting emotional ties. When psychopaths do turn to criminality, they use that charm and manipulation to coerce their victims into doing what they want. They might even use that charm to gain the trust of a victim. These are characterised as selfish and remorseless individuals who use others for their own selfish needs and desires. And I can see why some people think that Chris Watts showed some of these traits. He was quiet, and that could be interpreted as him not knowing how to fit in. Psychopaths tend to have a really good ability to mimic other people so that they look like they're fitting in. Psychopaths can't form lasting ties, and so this could be why he wasn't emotional after killing his family. He drove for 45 minutes with his wife's body in the car before killing his daughters. That isn't rage or any kind of an impulsive act. He didn't show any emotion when he returned home to find the police in his house or when he gave the interviews. He even did a day's work after killing them, and nobody noticed anything different or unusual. I do think that he has some psychopathic traits, but the main reason that I wouldn't label him as a psychopath is because psychopaths often have impulsive and chronically unstable relationships and an antisocial lifestyle. Chris Watts wasn't sexually promiscuous, nor had he ever been as far as we know. Psychopaths often engage in this sexually promiscuous behaviour, and as such they are likely to have been in many short-term relationships. What Chris Watts had done that day is called Familicide, which basically refers to the killing of one's partner or spouse and one or more of the children, followed by the suicide of the perpetrator. His actions aren't unique and have occurred many times in the past. Family annihilators are mostly men who kill their whole family. They're mostly white males around the age of 30. Family annihilation cases are prompted by an inciting incident. In this case, it was Shanann threatening to stop Watts having contact with their children following the breakup of their marriage. Professor David Wilson has conducted several studies on family annihilators, and he suggests that they can fit into one of four categories: anomic, disappointed, self-righteous, and paranoid. The anomic killer sees his family purely as a status symbol. When his economic status collapses, he sees them as being surplus to requirements. The disappointed killer seeks to punish the family for not living up to his ideals of a family life. The self-righteous killer destroys the family to exact revenge upon the mother in an act that he blames on her. Finally, the paranoid killer kills their family in what they imagine to be an attempt to protect them from something even worse happening. So clearly then, Chris Watts would be categorised as a self-righteous killer. What we see after the initial rage attack is an unfolding narrative in his mind. He says that he planned on killing himself once he got to the oil field, but he decided not to go through with it because someone would have to go through the trauma of finding him. However, he did only state that a few years later and may have false memories of how he thought he would have been acting on the day. He would have been in a heightened state that day and probably won't be able to accurately recall his thoughts. After dumping the bodies, he drove off thinking about self-preservation. In other words, how he could get away with what he'd just done. And this was when he planted the evidence and he made phone calls and he sent text messages. In the interview he gave on camera, he gives himself away by micro-facial expressions. He also gave himself away by not behaving as he normally would. In the Netflix documentary, it shows the body cam of the police officer talking to their next door neighbour, who says that something isn't right because Chris Watts was normally very quiet and didn't talk as much as he had done on that day. So we'll take a look at that interview now. Okay, rather than going through the whole video, we'll just look at some sections of the interview. So you can see as Chris Watts is answering and talking to the journalist, he's very flat with his responses. He shows no emotion at all.
They can get a scent, see where they went. If they went on foot, they went in a car, they went E-L-E-S-T-E.
You can see at various points during the interview that he purses his lips a lot. He swallows hard. He blinks a lot, which is called blocking with his eyes. He touches his nose during the interview, which is an indicator of deception. In this section of the interview, I've slowed the clip down so you can see the micro-facial expressions on him. He lifts up the side of one lip, which is a sign of contempt.
And it was just like, you know, I was...
This is a man who's lost his wife and his children, and he's smiling and laughing during the interview.
Go into their rooms and know that I wasn't going to turn the rain machines on. And I know that I wasn't going to turn their monitor on. And know I wasn't going to kiss them to bed tonight. It was...
He makes it all about him, what he's not going to be able to do.
Last night was horrible. I couldn't do it. I want everybody to just come home. Like, wherever they're at, come home.
Throughout the series of interviews, he comes to realise that he isn't going to be getting away with it. And so he tries to tell the story that's the least damaging to him. That is fairly normal from a psychological point of view. I'm sure we've all done something similar, but in less serious circumstances. He did try and say that Shanann killed the girls and so he'd killed her. Then he went on to admit that he'd done it and took full responsibility. This is a very disturbing case, and it can be hard to imagine how a father could kill his own little girls and his wife. Thankfully, cases such as these are rare. I hope that you've learned something throughout this psychological analysis and that you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.